we saw that natural necessity is a heteronomy of effective causes, because each effect can come about only through a law according to which something else gets the cause to exercise its causality. What can the freedom of the will be then but autonomy? That is, the will's property of itself being a law. However, the proposition, the will itself is a law in all its actions, only expresses the principle, act only on a maxim that can also have itself as a universal law for its object. And this is just the formula of the categorical imperative, and is the principle of morality. Therefore, a free will and a will under moral laws are identical. Immanuel Kant. There's a lot of talk about freedom. Politics is dominated by everyone talking about freedom, everyone wanting to be free, but usually there's not much reflection going on about what freedom actually means. Well, Kant did reflect about that, and I want to explain his concept of freedom here. And I want to start by stressing that while, of course, this is mainly important to practical philosophy and to moral philosophy, it goes beyond that. Usually, Kant's concept of freedom is only talked about in the context of what he says about acting, about morality, and I too talk about this here in that context. I am currently giving lectures on Kant's practical philosophy. But I would posit that Kant's concept of freedom goes like a red thread through all parts of his philosophy and is actually a key to understanding his whole philosophical project, to understanding what really mattered to him in his heart and what he wanted with all parts of his philosophy. And I find it unfortunate that this isn't stressed more usually, that when Kant is talked about as a whole, or when other parts of Kant's thinking are talked about, other parts than his moral philosophy, his concept of freedom is not stressed so much. At the core of his concept of freedom, there is a distinction between two kinds of freedom. He calls it, on the one hand, the wild freedom, or you could also translate it with savage freedom, maybe. In German it is wilde Freiheit, but the German word wild means wild and savage. There's no distinction in German. Sometimes he also calls this wild freedom the mad freedom. And on the other hand, there is freedom under the law. And the thought behind this distinction, wild freedom and freedom under the law, is something that might sound paradoxical at first, because Kant says the wild freedom, that is freedom that is completely free, not restricted by any rules, by any laws. You can really do whatever you want. And this wild freedom leads sooner or later, usually sooner, by necessity, to the loss of freedom. The paradoxical but very important thought of Kant is that in order to have freedom and in order to stay free, you need to restrict freedom. You need to bring the wild freedom under a law which gives it a framework within which freedom can exist. And this, again, this distinction between these two types of freedom can serve as a key to understand Kant's whole philosophy. I think it can most easily be understood when it comes to the philosophy of justice. Here, the wild freedom would be the natural state. Not living in a state, not having any laws, um, which means you can do whatever you want, right? You are free. You don't have to pay taxes. You don't have to follow any laws. That's great. The problem is with that, the other people also don't have to follow any laws. Meaning, anyone who wants can attack you, can murder you, or can steal from you, can rape you, can burn your house down. So, that wild freedom will lead to becoming unfree. It will lead pretty soon to the strong using their strengths to subjugate the weaker ones and ending all freedom, erecting some sort of tyranny. That is precisely why Kant says we need a state. We need laws that restrict freedom. Of course, they shouldn't restrict freedom arbitrarily. They should not restrict freedom too much. That would be despotism. They should only restrict freedom as much as is necessary to keep freedom. In other words, the only freedom that should be taken from us is the freedom to take others' freedom. For example, murder should clearly be forbidden, because if it was allowed, if I murder somebody or if somebody murders me, that's quite a loss of freedom. But you do need these certain laws. The problem is, of course, that people don't really want that. People have this tendency, as Kant notes, to want laws maybe for the others. The others shouldn't have wild freedom. They should, if any, they should only have freedom under the law. But for themselves, people want this wild freedom. And of course, nowadays you have these people, these liberal or libertarian people, who talk a lot about freedom and who are against the state, who are against laws. But it's very easy to see where that leads to. I mean, look at the US, where libertarianism is quite popular, and where people, for example, want the freedom to own guns, or where people want the freedom to not be forced to pay for healthcare, for public healthcare. Well, that is wild freedom. And that wild freedom will always end in the loss of freedom, because if you have the freedom to own guns, that also means others have the freedom to own guns and to go amok, to shoot down kids in a school. If you have the freedom to not be forced to pay into public health care, that also means you have the freedom to die from something very simple because you can't afford the hospital bills. Or here in Germany, I mean, what guns are to Americans, cars are to Germans. And Germany is one of the very, very few countries where there's no speed limit on the highway. You can drive as fast as you want. And this in the past years has again and again come up in politics. Again and again there have been calls for speed limits. But especially the liberals, the Liberal Party, they are against that. Because, no, we shouldn't restrict freedom. Freie Fahrt für freie Bürger, as they say. So, free driving for free citizens. Well, yeah, that also entails, of course, the freedom for those free citizens to die in car crashes. And it also, of course, includes the freedom to ruin the climate. And I mean, the climate crisis is really the best example of all, right? We insist on the freedom to fly, to drive around in our cars, to consume, to eat meat. And that freedom will lead pretty soon, I mean it's already doing that, to loss of freedom, to droughts, to breakdown of our economy and civilization, to wars, to refugees and so on. But this distinction between the two types of freedom is not just important for the philosophy of justice. It is what basically is at the core of all three of Kant's critiques. I mean, the critique of pure reason, Kant tries to examine what can reason do and what can't it do. Where are the borders, the limits of our cognition? And the point is that the philosophy, or more specifically the metaphysics, before Kant's critique, the metaphysics of the 18th century, especially the one of the Leibniz-Wolffian school, which was the most prominent in Germany in Kant's time, the metaphysics that Kant ended up calling dogmatic, it believes that with reason alone we can go beyond experience. We can access the supersensual and can have cognition of the supersensual, can have knowledge about God or about the soul and life after death. And that would be wild freedom in thinking. That would be the freedom to think whatever you want. But the problem is, Kant would say, if you allow yourself to think whatever you want and to speculate about whatever you want, to reason about whatever you want, you are destroying thinking. Because you can then come up with a proof for God and claim that you proved God. Another person can come up with something that disproves God, and with his argument actually destroy religion, or can come up with an argument against human freedom and thereby destroy morality by telling people that they aren't free and therefore aren't responsible. And if you allow yourself to believe in basically anything that can be solved, so anything that just doesn't contradict itself, then you allow yourself to believe in any sort of nonsense. You can believe in superstitions, in miracles, in ghosts, and this would destroy science. This would destroy our ability to actually apply cognition to life and to actually work with what we have understood about the world and the rules according to which it functions. I mean, if I have some papers on a table next to a window and the window is open and suddenly the papers fall down to the ground, if I stick to experience, if I stick to science, I can tell myself, well, that was the wind. They were blown down by the wind. And this allows me to act, right? This knowledge allows me to put something on the paper, something heavy, so they don't fall down, or to close the window so they won't be blown down anymore. But if I believe that the place is haunted and that it was a ghost who blew down the papers, the point isn't just whether this belief is right or wrong. Even if we assume it is right, we cannot do anything with it, right? If it was a ghost and not the wind, closing the window won't help. That won't prevent the papers from being blown down again. So this destroys my freedom to act. And that is exactly why Kant would say we need to restrict the freedom of thinking. He's not talking here, of course, about restrictions done by the state, about political restrictions. When someday I get to Kant's concept of Aufklärung, I will talk about why he is for freedom of speech. No, when he says we need to bring our thinking under a law which restricts the freedom of thinking, he is speaking of a law which we should give ourselves. And that is what his critique of pure reason is basically about. Um, Discovering the law that we should follow in our thinking. The law that brings order into the wild freedom of thinking, so that our thinking actually stays free. Likewise, in his critique of the power of judgment, here it is maybe most easy to miss that Kant is still working with that same concept of freedom, that same distinction between the two kinds of freedom. Um, but I talked about this in my lecture on what is genius and what is a genius artist. In those two lectures, I talked about how to Kant, um, genius is about originality, not just imitating the art of others, but producing something completely new. But the wild freedom of genius is also dangerous. You can have all these genius ideas that might be very original, but originality as such is not enough to be genius. Originality as such could also be madness. And Kant believes that the genius should be restricted by the rules of good taste. Because what is tasteful, I also gave a lecture on what is taste. What is tasteful is that which can be liked by everyone. So only if the original matter, the original content, the original idea of the genius is given a tasteful form, only then can it actually reach people, touch people, be enjoyed by people, and become exemplary, so that that artwork may influence and beget other art. But if, as is often done today by artists who just want to be genius and to do this modern abstract art that maybe is very original, but most people, some pretentious elitist people at some art gallery excluded, most people just don't really get it or don't really get anything out of it. So even if the content may be genius, the genius is lastly lost because it misses the the tasteful form. Finally, when it comes to your individual life, your individual actions, here too, you can of course live according to your wild freedom. If tomorrow you don't want to get up in the morning, you want to sleep in till 4 p.m., you can do so. If you want to stuff yourself with unhealthy food, with fat things, with sweet things, you can do so. If you want to take any number of drugs, you can do so. If you want to always openly tell everyone what you think of them, you can do so. If on the street you see a woman you find hot, you can approach her and you can harass her. But you will probably find that if you go with this wild freedom, you will very soon lose your freedom. You will lose your job and not make money anymore to pay your rent. You will become unhealthy. You will maybe get fat, maybe get diabetes. You may get addicted to drugs. You may die early. Or you may be socially ostracized. You may lose your social standing, lose your relationships. You may even go to jail. So, therefore, it is more rational to restrict your wild freedom by a law which allows you to keep your freedom. And this is what all of Kant's thinking is about. I already said in the lecture on what is wisdom to Kant that to him the philosopher, in not the school sense, not the metaphysician, but the philosopher in the world sense, so the sage, the wise person. And I said that in this world sense everyone should be a philosopher. That this philosopher is to Kant not just a technician of reason, applying reason to reach certain goals, but rather he is the lawgiver of reason. And this is exactly what this is about. The law that the philosopher, the wise person, should give is the law that restricts the wild, the mad freedom to a degree that allows it to actually stay freedom. And this is also what Kant's morality is about. It is about freedom. Usually when Kant's morality is discussed, there's a lot of talk about imperatives, about duty, which is not wrong, of course. Those are important terms when it comes to Kant's morality. But often it gives people a skewed view of what Kant's morality is about. Often what is missed is that it is ultimately just about freedom. It is just about retaining and expanding freedom, about having regard or reverence for freedom. When you do something immoral, when you murder somebody out of hate, or when you rape somebody out of lust, you are taking that person's freedom away, and really you are also taking your own freedom away, because you allow yourself to, like some wild animal, be ruled by sensual drives instead of ruling yourself through your reason, instead of reflecting about what actually would be good, what you actually should do. And so really these actions to Kant, they are not evil because they cause harm, they cause pain to your victim. That is really not the point to Kant, but rather they are evil because they take away the freedom both of the victim but also actually of the perpetrator. So this is what Kant's moral philosophy is about in general. It is about freedom. Now in my lecture on the faculty of desiring and choice and the will, I talked about how this faculty of desiring to Kant, on the one hand, it includes our faculty of choice. And choice is the faculty which, lets us choose specific actions, lets us choose between A and B. But this choice has to have some driving spring, which drives it to choose between A and B. Choice is not specific to humans. Animals too have choice. But in animals, the choice is driven by a drive. So they are not free in their choice. It's their drives, it's their instincts which make them choose whatever they choose. And I explained that humans too have drives. They have sensual choice, so their sensuality can influence their choice. But I explained that their choice can also be determined by their reason. And practical reason is the will. The will and its motives can determine the choices we make. And that would then be a rational choice, if we have thought about what we are actually doing. And this means that the will, or once again practical reason, gives certain principles to the choice that determine our actions, and these are the imperatives that I discussed in the previous lecture, where I explained that to Kant there are three kinds of imperatives. There are the hypothetical imperatives, which are either imperatives of skill or of prudence. either dealing with reaching whatever goal we may have, or dealing with reaching the goal of happiness, or they are categorical imperatives, which are moral imperatives, which tell us not just how to reach a goal we might have or we actually have, but which tell us what our goal should be. And well, now the important point to note is that when we are following a hypothetical imperative, so one that tells us if you want to achieve X, you need to do Y, then sure, the choice as such, the action as such, can be called a rational action, because we are not just acting on impulse, on a blind instinct, but we are actually thinking about what would be the best course of action to reach our goal. But what about the goal itself? The goal itself is not set by reason, right? If, let's say, someone's goal is to eat a tasty meal, then he can use imperatives of skill to cook that meal. And he can be a good cook who cooks that meal in a very skillful manner. I explained in previous lectures that reason to Kant is a faculty of justification. Acting rationally means being able to justify, to explain why we are undertaking that action. And maybe the cook can do that if he is a skillful cook. He is not just blindly throwing stuff into a pot and blindly heating it and hoping it will turn into something, but rather maybe he can justify each action he undertakes. He can justify why he cooks it for that much time and not longer, because maybe if he cooked it longer then it would lose taste and many of the vitamins would be lost. Or he can justify why he cooks it at this temperature. Maybe if he used a higher temperature it could easily burn or whatever. So the means he uses to reach his end are rational, they could be justified. But the end as such, if I ask him not why do you cook it for that long or why do you cook it with this temperature, but rather why do you cook this at all he could say is because I'm hungry and this will taste good. Which is of course not a rational reason, but rather a reason that comes out of our sensuality. And likewise, if someone is feeling lust and there's a woman he finds hot, let's say, in a club or something, of course he can flirt with her in a very prudent manner. And again, the specific action he undertakes would therefore be rational actions. They would not be aimless, but rather he would actually be thinking about what he's doing. He could maybe justify why he acts in that way to reach his goal. But if I again ask him, why do you have this goal at all? Why do you want to have sex with that woman? All he could say is, well, I find her hot and I'm horny. So here, when it comes to hypothetical imperatives, the goals are not rational goals, which doesn't mean that they are anti-rational. I want to stress that, because Kant is not saying that our sensuality is bad or evil, or that we mustn't have sensual drives ever. He is against what he calls the virtue of monks. He is against complete asceticism. That's not his point. But still, even if they are not anti-rational, those goals are certainly not rational goals, even if our way of reaching the goals might be rational. And that means that while we do use reason here, reason is, as Kant calls it, heteronomous. So if you translate that from the Greek, heteronomy, hetero is always the different, the strange, right? The other, so heterosexual, if you are into the other sex and not into your own. And nomos is the law. So that means that reason, when it is heteronomous reason, is under a law which, so to say, comes from the outside, which reason has not given itself. Because I might think about how to cook my meal, or I might think about how to flirt with this woman, and I might conduct myself in a rational manner here, and I might rationally choose what to do here, but I haven't rationally chosen to be hungry at all, or to be horny at all. And also I haven't even rationally chosen to be hungry for this specific thing, like to have this taste, to, I don't know, enjoy sweet things more than bitter things or whatever. Or likewise, I haven't rationally chosen to have this specific sexuality, to be turned on by these things, to, for example, be straight and not gay. This is also exactly why, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, the technical, practical imperatives to Kant are not practical in the true sense of the word. Because, again, reason is not setting the goal, the purpose of our action here. So the actual practical element, the purpose, is set by sensuality. And reason is only serving our sensuality as an instrument and helping us to reach that goal which reason, has not given us. Now, if you look back to my lecture on the foundation of morality, where I explained that according to Kant, there are only really 4 moral principles, apart from his would be the 5th. All morality is usually either founded on empiricism or rationalism, and in both cases there is an inner empiricism or inner rationalism, and there's an outer empiricism and outer rationalism. And if you go back to that lecture, and if you reflect on those 4 types of morality again, you will find that in all of them our reason is heteronomous. Meaning, in all of them, we are really following hypothetical imperatives. In all of them, we are really told you should act morally if you want X. So, for example, the outer empiricism would say, if you want to conform with your society's norms, or if you want to conform with the laws, then you should act morally. Or the inner empiricism would say, if you want to feel good, for example, because of your compassion, if you don't want to suffer because you see others suffering, then you should act morally. Or the rationalism, the inner rationalism would say, if you want to be perfect, if you want to perfect yourself, you should act morally. While the outer rationalism would say, if you want to obey God and, for example, maybe not be punished, not go to hell, then you should act morally. All of them have the issue that they don't give us a true ought, a true shall, true duty. They don't tell us you have to act morally, and if you don't, you are evil. This is your duty, this is how you should act. But rather they tell us, well, you should act like this if that is your goal. And therefore all four of those heteronomous principles are not truly moral principles at all. That is exactly why they all come down to, as I already mentioned in the previous lecture, to eudaemonism, the principle of happiness. They all promise if you do the good actions, that will serve your own interests. You will get happy. And if you don't do them, then really you are harming yourself. For example, if you do what is good, you go to heaven. If you don't do what is good, you go to hell. That might be true, or maybe it isn't true. But even if it is true, if that is my reason to do good, then I'm not a good person. I'm a selfish person. I'm just being selfish in a smart and a prudent manner. But I'm still being selfish. I'm not doing it for its own sake. I'm not doing the moral action because it is good as such, but rather because it serves me, because it is good for me. Kant stresses that true morality doesn't work with an if. It doesn't say you should act morally if. No, you should act morally, period. Everything else may need a further justification. Everything else may just be a means to an end, to reach some other purpose. But the good, not just the useful, not just that which is good for something, but the morally good, is good as such. It is a purpose in itself. It is the end of ends, so to say. And that is exactly why Kant's principle of heteronomy, of free law-giving, where our reason is autonomous because it doesn't serve some other outer law, but it gives itself its law, is not a better moral principle than others, but it is the only moral principle. It is the only philosophy that is actual moral philosophy, and not just, be it more openly or in a less honest manner, a philosophy of happiness. So, if you reflect on what I have said so far here, what follows from Kant's concept of freedom is really that three things which nowadays we might not be used to consider as being connected or as being one. Three things are very much connected, and that is freedom, rationality, and morality. What Kant shows us is that these three concepts go along with each other, or that even you could go so far as to say they are one and the same. You cannot be free if you are irrational. You cannot be free if you are immoral. Or likewise, you cannot be moral if you are irrational or if you are not free. And likewise, you cannot be rational if you are immoral or if you are unfree. They are one and the same. And this is what I want to further get into and further explain now. Let us start with rationality. Nowadays, everyone wants to be called rational. People are usually quite insulted if you tell them that they are irrational, that they are not reasonable people. But if you actually listen to what they think of rationality, it seems to come down to the opinion that being rational means being egoistical, being selfish. I can see that in the political debate a lot, at least here in Germany. Rationality is often called up in political debate. People say, oh, we need to be more rational, or with this party you can't do rational politics, they are a bad party. But then if you ask what do they actually want, what do they actually mean by that, when they say we need to be more rational, they always mean we need to be more selfish. Like they will say things like, oh, we can't take in all the refugees of the world, we can't just be good, we need to be rational about this and think of ourselves and of the stability of Germany. Or we can't just help Ukraine, it costs too much and it risks war with Russia, we should go back, we should abandon Ukraine and go back to make dealings with Russia and buy their gas. Or no, we can't stop dealing with despotic regimes like China or Saudi Arabia. We need to deal with them to buy their resources, we need to be rational. Or no, we can't do radical climate policies that would harm our economy, that would harm our economic growth. We need to be rational about this. So really, it comes down to being rational, meaning being assholes. And if you ask the question, what do these people mean by rationality? Why do they believe that these policies they advocate for are so rational? Then the answer is clearly because they believe that these policies are best for us. So, in my case, best for Germany. Now, that might be very debatable. I would argue, and Kant would argue, that happiness and morality are not so much at odds as people usually think. I already mentioned that in previous lectures, that while, yes, Kant rejects eudaemonism as the leading principle of action and of morality, while he insists on heteronomy as the principle, he doesn't reject happiness as such. He believes that usually the moral action will also be the most prudent action, will be the action that leads to happiness. And I mean, we can see that with these political issues. It is really not smart to deal with despotic regimes and to depend on the resources they give us. We should not depend on anyone, and especially not on someone who clearly thinks about himself and not about our interests, and who clearly is not reliable. It is just more prudent, even morality aside, to become as independent as possible when it comes to economy, to resources, to energy. And likewise, no, it is not very smart to make peace with Russia. There clearly is no peace with Russia. We should have learned that appeasement politics don't work. If we didn't learn from Hitler, then at least we should have learned now in our times from Putin. I mean, we let him do war in Georgia. We let him annex Crimea. Now, if we let him take the rest of Ukraine, that won't be the end of it, clearly. Next he will be in Poland or in the Baltic states. So, and I don't even have to go into the climate issue. Clearly it is not prudent to put economy above ecology. There's a reason why we seem to have forgotten that, but both of these words come from the same root, from the Greek oikos, the house we live in. And without ecology, our house burns down. Even now, our economy is already greatly harmed by the climate emergency. The last years have seen several droughts in Europe, which harmed our harvests. This year is not looking good either so far. Or some years ago, there has been a big flooding in some valley in Germany, which costs millions or even billions, not to mention the way over 100 people who died. So, no, this alleged prudence of these oh so rational people is not prudent at all. It is very short-sighted. But that aside, let's pretend they are right for a moment. Let's pretend that they are being prudent and what they propose really does bring us the biggest happiness. Okay, but that's all it does. They are claiming rationality is being pragmatic. They even say as much. They often say we need to be more pragmatic in politics. And to Kant, pragmatism always means whatever brings me happiness, the principle of happiness. Well, my question is, why is your happiness the most rational thing in the world? What does reason care about your happiness? I mean, I get why you care about your happiness. But I'm asking, why does reason care about it? Because it seems what these people are suggesting is that we should sacrifice other people's happiness for our own, right? I mean, when they say we can't take in refugees, taking in refugees, it will destabilize the country, or the refugees, they won't work, they will just live off the money we give them, or they will be criminals and terrorists, they will stab people. Maybe all of that racist bullshit is actually true. Let's assume it is true for a second. But, okay, so we take in a refugee, he stabs someone, meaning that someone dies. He wouldn't have died if we wouldn't have taken that refugee in. Fair enough. But maybe the refugee would have died then. Maybe he would have drowned in the Mediterranean Sea, as so many do. Or maybe if we sent him back to, let's say, Afghanistan, he would have gotten killed by the Taliban. So, why is the life of that person here in Germany who might have gotten stabbed by that refugee, why is it more rational to save the life of that person than to save the life of that refugee? I understand, of course, why that person would want his life to be saved, but I'm assuming that the refugee would rather want his life to be saved. Neither of them are being more rational than the other. Likewise, sure, when we help Ukraine, that might actually harm our economy. Our heating in winter might get more expensive, sure. But I mean, if we don't help Ukraine, I think that harms their economy quite a lot more, and not just their economy. Or even if we help Ukraine, there's still a lot of discussion about that in Germany. Oh, if we send them too much weapons, we might anger Russia, and then we might be drawn into this war as well. Well, if we don't send them those weapons, then they are drawn into the war. Or they continue to be drawn. I mean, they already are in the war, but then the war will continue, or they will lose the war. And again, I can understand why you would maybe rather want Ukraine to be bombed than Germany if you live in Germany. But what I don't understand is why reason would rather want Ukraine to be bombed than Germany to be bombed. So, if you consider not your own perspective, but if you imagine for a moment you were a rational being but a neutral rational being, a being that, so to say, stays outside of the universe, watching what is going on here on Earth from outside. Why, if you were this neutral being with no horse in the race, why would you rather want Germany to be prosperous and secure and not Ukraine? If indeed, as you claim, it can't be both. Or why would you rather want some German having a good life than some refugee from Afghanistan or from Syria or whatever? This has nothing to do with rationality. I mean, I could also ask a louse, which there's a nice little quote by Kant where he says that lice are insects which both in their manner of living and in their unworthiness very well reflect the state of most humans. So I could ask the lice on some child's head if they would rather have the head of that child which they live on be washed, or the lice-infested head of the neighbor child. Of course they would say, wash that other head. But would that be rational? That selfishness of the lice? No, they are just animals with a natural animal instinct for survival, that's all. There's nothing rational about it whatsoever. Now I can of course foresee what the response to that would be. Those people would respond to me that, okay, I'm right. Their goal as such is not rational. It is the goal any animal has. It is just the goal of self-preservation. And only the manner that they want to follow that goal, only the means they apply to reaching that goal might be rational. But they would tell me that this is all there is. That in the end we are animals, even if we are smart animals, and we cannot set ourselves a rational goal. There is no such thing as a goal which is rational as such. The goals will always come out of our nature, of our sensuality. Well, this is an opinion you can hold, of course, but then you should admit that you are an arationalist, as I like to call it. So, like the atheist doesn't believe in God, the arationalist doesn't believe in reason. These people may talk about reason, they may claim to be oh so rational, they may be offended when you tell them that they are irrational, but how can you claim to be rational when actually you don't believe that there is such a thing as reason? You don't believe in practical reason, you don't believe in reason setting goals, setting purposes. If there's one thing I detest, it is intellectual dishonesty. You can take any stance you want, any position you want, but be honest about what your actual position is. And the position of most people, whether they are conscious of it or not, but this is the zeitgeist, the position of most people is that they see reason as something the human being has. A sort of instrument, right? So other animals may have wings or claws or sharp eyes or teeth, and we have reason. It's something we have. This is of course completely wrong. As Fichte showed, it's the other way around. Reason has the human. Reason has humanity. Not the human has reason. But people believe that reason is an instrument they have. Indeed, this reason of theirs is just instrumental reason. That is a term that Horkheimer used. Horkheimer wrote Critique of Instrumental Reason, which of course in its title alludes to Kant's critiques. And I think it is a quite fitting term. what Horkheimer calls instrumental reason is more or less the same thing that Kant calls technical practical reason. It is that heteronomous reason that gives us hypothetical imperatives, that helps us reach goals, but doesn't set those goals themselves. And Horkheimer, of course, wrote right after World War II. The Frankfurt School, Horkheimer and Adorno, they dealt with what had happened, with that breach of civilization, as they saw it, with the Holocaust. And Horkheimer would point out that with merely instrumental reason, you can reach any goal. You can build concentration camps with that. Or you can destroy nature with it. You can completely commodify and objectify everything and destroy nature and the very foundation of our living on this earth. Even to a degree which, not just to Kant, who of course lived way earlier, but even to Horkheimer, who didn't live so long ago, but even to him it would probably not have been imaginable just to what degree we are nowadays destroying this earth we live on. Kant himself already uses a similar term. Usually he might only speak of technical practical reason, but he does call this kind of reason at one point the causa instrumentalis of our actions, so the instrumental cause, while the autonomous, the moral reason, would be the causa originaria, the original cause of our actions. And, well, it is, especially in the face of the climate emergency, it would be high time for us to remember what our name as a species is and to live up to our name. Our name is not Homo prudens. We are not just the smart, the prudent human who can use reason as an instrument to maybe reach his goals or maybe become happy, but we are supposed to be Homo sapiens, to be the wise human being. And wisdom to Kant, I discussed that in the last lecture on the imperatives. I already also discussed it in the way earlier lecture on what is wisdom. Wisdom is always connected to morality. Wisdom is about asking not just how do I reach a purpose, but what should be my purpose. And as a side note, in that earlier lecture on wisdom, I had also mentioned that to Kant, the regular scientist, including the philosopher, including the metaphysician, is just what he calls a technician of reason, precisely because he only deals with technical practical, with instrumental, as you could say, imperatives. Because he only understands the rules, the laws according to which nature functions, and then can apply those to reach any possible goal. As Kant would say, if you have knowledge of medicine, you can produce a medicine to heal someone. You can probably also use your knowledge to produce a poison, to poison someone. While, as I had said, the philosopher in the world sense, the sage, the wise man, he is not just a technician of reason, he is a lawgiver of reason. He says where we should go. And that law which he gives to reason, but also through reason, is of course mainly the moral law. So maybe with what I explained now, you can now, looking back at that earlier lecture, understand better what I said there. But with that, I want to move on from rationality to freedom. Freedom too, just like rationality, is a terribly misused word nowadays. As I already said, everyone talks about it, everyone wants to be free, but people seem to think that being free just means being able to do whatever you want. But they don't question why they want what they want. They don't question where their wants come from. If they are really their wants, or if they are just the wants of their nature, or the wants that society implanted in them with the way it raised them. They don't question their own wants. And Kant's concept of freedom is different. While most people would think they are free when they can get whatever they desire, Kant would say the more desires you have, the less free you are. Even if you can fulfill your desires, maybe you are rich and whatever happens to go through your mind, every whim, you can immediately buy it, you can immediately get it fulfilled. Still, you are not free. You are a slave to your desires. A dog bound by golden chains, Kant says, is still bound by chains, even if they are gold. So, no, you are not free if you can fulfill your desires. You are free if you don't need them fulfilled to be happy. If you won't suffer and whine and complain and get angry once you don't get a desire fulfilled, but rather if you don't have all these unnecessary desires. That is true freedom to Kant. What we are dealing with here, I like to call the liberal concept of freedom. And we do live in a liberal age where almost everyone is a liberal. Now, I'm aware that the word liberal has different connotations depending on where you are from. Like in the United States, it's used more or less synonymous with leftist. While here in Germany, on the other hand, when people hear liberal, or when people think of our liberal party, they mostly mean liberal in an economic sense. So supporters of the free market, of low taxes and so on. And those liberals are actually more closer to the right-wingers. But what I mean by liberal is precisely this belief that freedom means following your desires, getting whatever you want, not being hindered in that, and not questioning those desires and those wants. And in that sense, both the modern left and the modern right are actually liberals. To be sure, they may have different desires that they care about, and they may want some different liberties, but my philosophy is all about looking at what a person's posture is, looking at the principle that is at the root of that person's opinions and that person's actions. And here we say that the right and the left and the way they act and the way they argue are actually quite similar. Now, leftist liberals, they might say, I want to have the liberty to look however I want, to get tattooed and pierced and dye my hair pink, and not be judged or shamed for that. And I want to have sexual liberty. I want to be able to have sex with whomever I want and however I want, and I don't want to be kink-shamed or whatever. And I want the liberty to abortion. And I want the liberty to change my gender and to decide on my own pronouns and to have that respected and to have others use those pronouns. And they will complain if they feel those liberties are not given to them, then they will complain about old white men or about the patriarchy or whatever. Well, the right-wing liberal, on the other hand, he may demand the liberty to say whatever he wants without getting cancelled. He will go on about free speech and about his freedom to offend people. Or he wants the liberty, if he's American, to own guns, or if he's German, to drive however fast he wants. And he wants the liberty to not have to care about the climate. He wants to eat his meat and drive his SUV and fly in his plane. And he wants to have the liberty to not have to pay high taxes or to pay for social security and health insurance, to not have to care for other people and so on. And if he feels those liberties are not respected, he will complain about the woke mob and green leftist communist dictatorship and whatever. And really, those people in their conduct are quite similar. In both cases, they are not willing to ever question themselves or to ever have themselves be questioned. Like, if you just try to have an open debate with them, if you just ask them, okay, you have these desires, but do you really think these desires are good? Like, right-winger, do you really think you need to fly? Or you need to drive your car? Or do you really think you need to eat meat? Is it not possible that you just got fed meat since you were a little child and you just got used to it and never questioned whether that is good, whether good to the animals or good to the environment or whatever? Or left-winger, do you really need to change your gender? Or do you really need to be addressed by some new made-up pronouns that never before existed in your language? Do you really need to be triggered when someone just uses normal, regular pronouns when talking about you? Or is it maybe that you are too sensitive, or that this is just a symptom of some mental health issues? When you just want to openly ask those questions, no matter what the result of that debate might be, I mean, maybe those people are in the right, but they are not willing to even have that debate. They will just get triggered, because even if you just ask the question, they will feel like you are taking their liberty away. They will feel that the mere question is already an attack. The mere question already expresses your desire to restrict their freedom. And that too, those liberals, whether they are on the left or on the right, are quite similar to each other. They hate what is at the core of Aufklärung, and that is self-reflection, questioning yourself, being willing to not just accept the way you are and accept your own desires at face value and just be ruled by them, but rather questioning whether this is rational, whether this is good. And by the way, I'm quite aware that if any such liberals, no matter on which side, are now listening, they might also be triggered by being lumped in with the other side, and they might want to insist that, oh, but this is totally different. Their liberties are completely different. How dare I lump in their very important Second Amendment right to own guns with what those leftist liberals want, killing unborn babies? Or how do I dare lumping in the basic human right of women to their own body with gun ownership or whatever. But I'm not making any statement here about the actual content of these various desires. I'm not saying that they are all equal. No. It might be that some of them are indeed better than others. It is, however, quite possible in politics to support a good, a just policy for the wrong, for irrational, for selfish reasons. Just like it is possible to oppose a bad and unjust policy for the wrong, for selfish reasons. I'm not discussing here which of these policies is more justified than the other, which of these liberties should be granted or taken away. I'm just pointing out that the basic stance, the basic posture of most people nowadays is this self-uncritical liberalism that just wants the freedom to get whatever it desires without ever questioning those desires. And this liberalism has become quite dominant in the last decades. It has become dominant after World War II. It has become even more dominant, I would say, in the last 30 or so years after the fall of the Soviet Union. And now people can almost not imagine another sort of politics anymore. And at least here in Germany, this has completely almost made politics impossible. Here in Germany, there has been a lot of talk about Verbotspolitik, politics of prohibition. That is a polemical slogan that gets thrown around a lot. The Greens are a prohibition party, and they are only doing prohibition politics. They want to prohibit us from eating meat and from driving cars and so on. And it is at a point where, again, at least here in Germany, the politicians seem to fear being seen as doing prohibition politics so much that they would rather do nothing. Because, I mean, it is their job to prohibit things. That is why we have a state. That is why we have law. Some things should be prohibited. I am glad about politics of prohibition. I am glad that murder is prohibited or that rape is prohibited. That is a good thing. Of course, not everything should be prohibited. Of course, that would be despotism. Of course, we should always discuss whether something should or shouldn't be prohibited. But we shouldn't say that prohibitions as such are a bad thing. If we didn't want to have any prohibitions, again, we wouldn't need laws. We could just live in the natural state without laws, in the wild freedom. And that is what liberalism tends towards. We see that in its more extreme form in libertarianism. Liberalism is about rejecting that freedom be restricted and thereby kept alive through laws. And liberalism is about insisting on keeping your own wild freedom without reflecting about how that wild freedom might actually lead to the end of freedom. And here in Germany, this has infected politics so much that even in matters that should not be that controversial, and even in matters where majority actually supports a ban, politicians still don't dare to do it. Like the thing with the speeding limit is that for years now, the majority of Germans in polls has actually supported speeding limits, and still the politicians just won't impose them. And also, A very recent example, fireworks. Here in Germany, you are allowed to shoot fireworks on New Year's, and this causes so much damage. Everything is full of garbage afterwards. People get hurt or even killed. Back in school, I had a schoolmate in ninth grade who blew off his finger some New Year's. Property is hurt. It costs the taxpayers so much because the fire department has to work the whole day and is constantly called. Traumatized people like refugees who experienced war, also pets like dogs, they get often scared from the fireworks. Also, it causes a lot of environmental damage, a lot of emissions, and indeed, most people are for a ban. There has been a very huge petition after this New Year's, the biggest one in German history. There's a large majority through all the parties supporting it, and still the chancellor couldn't bring himself to restricting people's freedom like that. So this liberalism has infected us so much that politicians don't dare doing anything anymore. But let's question this liberal concept of freedom for once. Are you really free if you can do whatever you want, if maybe your wants are not your own? Maybe they come from your nature. Maybe they are just the current fashion, the current customs. Maybe they come from some ideology that you've been indoctrinated with. Maybe they are just what you are used to. They are just your habits that you never questioned. And Kant advises to never let habits form. The more habits we have, he says, the less free we are. And this goes even for good habits. He would stress that you should not do moral actions out of habit. They lose any worth they might have if they are not done because you reflected about them and understood that they are good, and decided to do them, but rather because they are just a habit. And also, a habit can be broken. Like, if you do good only out of habit, let's say you have the habit of always giving a bit of your money, always donating a bit of money, and you just never think of it, and now you are in a little more tight situation economically, so you stop donating. Now, if you are actually a good person, you might think about what else you can do besides donating if you don't have the money to donate anymore. You might go now to help in a soup kitchen in your free time or something. But if you just follow the habit, then you won't replace that action with anything else. So we should question why we do something, where our wants come from. This, what I call the liberal freedom, Kant, in a famous passage of his critique of practical reason, calls it the freedom of a turnspit. So in his day, there were already machines. When you wanted to spit roast some meat, you didn't have to stand by it and turn it yourself, but rather there was some mechanism that you just had to turn on, and then that machine would turn on its own. But would we therefore claim that this turnspit is free? Of course not, because while the individual turn may be free, it was not turned by some human standing beside it and turning it, the fact that it turns at all is not done out of freedom. It just follows this mechanism, and this mechanism was started by a person. In another less famous passage, Kant also compares this freedom with the freedom of a clock. It's the same thing. There's a mechanism, and of course now when the arm of the clock moves, it's not like I pushed it. It's not like I forced it to move. It moves on its own. But it moves on its own because of a mechanism, because it was started by someone. So it's not really free. And this is what we can use for any other sort of automaton or mechanism. This analogy would apply to all of them. You could also think of a robot, of an AI that was programmed to work in a certain way. And now, of course, the individual actions it undertakes are not directly determined by anybody, but they are still not free actions if it just follows its programming. Fichte uses another image. Fichte says, imagine a tree and imagine that tree somehow gaining consciousness. But not freedom, just consciousness. Now, if you let the tree grow, it would have grown anyways, right? Even without having consciousness. That's just its nature. But if you let it grow according to its nature, it will now, having gained consciousness, feel that it is free. While if you cut away the branches and the twigs of the tree and don't let it grow freely, it may now feel unfree. And likewise, if you let the tree grow, the fruits it may grow, like let's say it's an apple tree, if you just let it grow apples, again, the tree will probably consider itself free. But now if you graft some other fruits of some other plant onto that tree, just like when you prune that tree, it will now feel unfree. But it is not free anyways. It is a tree, it follows its nature. Just because it gained consciousness doesn't mean it gained freedom. It just will now think that it is free when it gets to follow its nature. But since it didn't decide to have this nature, that's not freedom. I mean, is the oak tree really free when it grows oaks and not, let's say, oranges or cherries or whatever? Of course not. It didn't decide to be an oak tree. It didn't decide to grow oaks. These two analogies of Kant's and of Fichte's, I want to add to them a third analogy, one of my own, and that is addiction. Imagine a drug addict, let's say someone who's addicted to heroin. If you prevent him from taking his drugs, he will of course feel unfree because he will not get what he desires. While if you let him have his drugs, if he gets another shoot of heroin, he may feel that he is free now. He gets what he desires. But is it him who desires this drug? No, it's his addiction which desires it. And he is not free by getting this drug that his addiction makes him want. Rather, he would be free if he were to be cured of his addiction, if he would stop wanting and needing that drug. That would be true freedom for him. Sure, subjectively, so in the way you feel yourself, you might be free when you just get what you desire, when you just get to do whatever feels pleasant to you. But objectively, actually, you are free when you are not ruled by whatever feels pleasant to you, but rather when you can do whatever you understand to be good. So when you can reflect about things, when you can reflect about your actions, when you can use reason and ask your own reasons, what would be good, what would be bad, and when you can follow those concepts of good and bad, good and evil that you have, then you are free, Kant says. And a lot of people either may reflect about what would be good, what would be bad, but they still don't act according to that insight. They still let themselves be ruled by mere sensual drives. Like, for example, someone, again, the drug addict, and we don't have to go with heroin, maybe let's take just someone who smokes. Maybe he says smoking is bad, smoking is unhealthy, I should stop smoking. Meaning he used his reason to ask what would be a good, what would be a bad action. In this case, it's not even about what is morally good. It's just about what is useful, what is prudent, what is pragmatically good, what leads me to lasting happiness, not just to momentary happiness because I get to smoke, but to lasting happiness because I'm healthy and have a long life. But still, despite this insight that this action, stopping to smoke, would be good, he still keeps smoking. Meaning he is not free. He is a slave of his drives. And while this is quite common, people acting against their better insight, what is even more common is people not even having an insight. Most of the time, people don't reflect about their actions. People don't even ask their reason. What would be good? What would be bad? They just do something. They just follow their drives, and that's it. And that's not freedom. Kant distinguishes two types of freedom here. He distinguishes psychological freedom from transcendental freedom. Psychological freedom just means that you, in your desires, in your actions, you are not determined by the outer nature, but only by the inner nature, by your own representations. Here I want to remind you, I talked about this in my lecture on sensuality and on time and space, that to Kant we have two senses. We have an outer sense, through which we view the things around us, including our own body, through which we view extended things, through which we view things in space, which gives us an outer nature. And the science of that outer nature would be physics to Kant. So to him, that is natural science in general. That would include chemistry and biology. It's not limited to what we nowadays call physics. And then we have an inner sense through which we are viewing our own representations. Our thoughts, our sensations, our feelings, our desires, our wishes. Anything that goes on in our mind, in our soul, in our psyche, you could say. And this gives us the inner nature, which is not in space, only in time. And the science of the inner nature, of course, would be psychology. So we have these two natures, and the psychological freedom just means that you are not determined by the outer nature. You are only determined by the inner nature, but you are still determined. In nature, there are chains of causality. And if a certain action is a link in such a chain, then it is clearly not a free action. In the outer nature, we see that very clearly. If you take domino, if you take pieces of domino, and now you turn over the first piece, and it falls against the second, and the second falls against the third, and so on. We all understand that the pieces in this chain of domino pieces, that they are not free. Because one piece falling down is not because it decided to fall down, but rather because it was pushed by the piece before. It is just a link in a chain of causality in the outer nature. where one body pushes another body. But in the inner nature, in our psyche, there also can be such a chain of dominoes. It's just not a chain of bodies physically pushing one another, but rather it is a chain of representations where one representation causes another. But if, for example, you buy a car, if you buy a Porsche or a Lamborghini or whatever, not because someone might have forced you on the outside. Maybe no one put a gun to your head, or maybe the government didn't pass a law saying you have to buy a Porsche. Fair enough. You wanted it, you desired it. But if that desire was caused by a previous representation, let's say by, in your mind, having this concept that owning such a car, owning a Porsche, makes you seem cool, gives you status as a rich person, makes your penis seem longer or whatever. And that representation again, in turn, was caused by something else probably. Was cursed by some other representation, was cursed by your maybe just unconscious feeling of lack, of being insufficient, of not being enough, of needing to prove yourself, of needing to compensate that lack of yours, of needing to fill that emptiness somehow. Then that action of buying that car was clearly no more free than the falling down of the domino piece. I mean, we could add to that a concept of physical freedom. We could say that if we go back to the analogy of the turnspit, the turnspit is physically free if it can freely turn, if no one halts it, if no one blocks its turning. And it's psychologically free if we imagine it having, well, a psyche, and if no one actually turns it, but it turns on its own. But still, it is a natural process. Still, it is a chain of causality. Still, it is following a mechanism. So, the psychological freedom is not actual freedom. Actual freedom, the actual supersensual idea of freedom, which is, as I discussed in the lecture on what is metaphysics, along with God and immortality of the soul, one of the three main ideas that metaphysics has to deal with, according to Kant. Transcendental freedom would mean being able to not just be a link in a chain of causality, but to actually start a new chain. Transcendental freedom would mean not being sensual, because as I explained in the lecture on sensuality and the supersensual, on the thing in itself and its appearance, sensuality to Kant means receptiveness. We are sensual whenever we are somehow affected and when we are somehow reacting to that, right? When we have representations, when we have feelings, when we have desires and do actions because of the way we were affected, and that is sensual. Now, whenever you are part of a chain of causality in nature, even if it's not an outer nature but an inner nature, that is sensual. You are being affected somehow by something else. Transcendental feeling would be supersensual, would be intellectual. And while sensuality is defined by Kant as receptiveness, intellectuality by him is defined as spontaneity or self-activeness. So being self-active, doing something completely new. doing something without being caused to do it. Your action not being an effect of some other cause, but being completely spontaneous, being without an outer cause. And that would be actual freedom. That would be, I mean, that's the freedom that philosophers actually care about, right? That is the amazing thing about humanity, that we have this spontaneity, that unlike animals, we are not just part of the natural chain of causality. We are not in our choices just determined by what came before, by our instincts, by our impulses, by the sensations that affect us, but we can start something completely new and original. That is what Hannah Arendt, being influenced by Kant amongst others, cared so much about, what to her made, both thinking and acting, what to her is at the roots of true politics, the human ability to start something completely new. And that is the transcendental freedom, this spontaneity. But this transcendental freedom, to Kant, implies morality, because Kant would stress that nothing can be completely lawless. Nothing can be completely arbitrary and coincidental. And even if it was, then it would be worthless, right? So this spontaneous freedom, this starting a new chain of causality, I mean, all the links that come after my action in that chain, they are part of the natural causality again. They are caused directly or indirectly by my first action. But that first action as such, if it was just completely contingent and coincidental, it would be like a metaphysical, like a divine coin toss, whether I do A or B. That would be worthless. That would not be true freedom. So that means if everything needs to be determined by a law, but freedom in the transcendental sense means acting without being determined by a natural law, without being caused by a previous cause in nature, then it can only mean being determined by a law we gave ourselves. So here we are back at the autonomy I talked about before, right? And this law we give ourselves through our own reason can only be the moral law. The law that tells us not how we should act, but would be most skillful or most prudent to reach a certain goal that has been given to us by nature, because then again we would be part of the natural chain, right? We would be heteronomous, not autonomous. It can only be the law that tells us what we ought to do, period. What would be good, what would be evil. Now this leads me, after discussing the first two of these three connected concepts, rationality and freedom, this leads me to the third, to morality. Because to Kant, there's a difference between negative and positive freedom. Negative freedom, I already mentioned that in the lecture on the faculty of desiring and on choice and will. The negative freedom of our choice is that it is free from, sensuality, free from the sensual drives. Not free from them in the sense that it can just get rid of them. They will always be there. But free from them in the sense that it doesn't have to follow them, right? I said in that lecture, I can, of course, feel hunger. I can have that drive of hunger, but I can still decide whether I'm on a diet to lose some weight, or whether I'm fasting for reasons of faith, or whether I'm in a situation where there's little food and I see that it would be morally wrong to eat it all and not give to the other person that is stuck there with me, I can decide to act in a different manner and make the choice to not follow that natural drive. And that is my negative freedom. That I, unlike an animal, have a choice which has these central drives, but still have the choice to not follow them. But the positive freedom would be that instead I can determine myself. I can choose to, instead of following my central drives, to follow my intellectual motives. And that positive freedom is needed, or else we wouldn't have negative freedom. I mean, fine, I'm free from my central drives, but I have to act somehow, right? I have to make some choice. If I'm not choosing to follow my drives, then what else would I be following? If I didn't have positive freedom, then I would have no reason to ever go against my drives. So again, negative freedom means I don't have to follow my drives. Positive freedom means I can instead follow myself. I can follow the law I give myself through my own reason. So Kant defines positive freedom as the ability to act according to our own concepts of what is right and wrong. We can think about what would be right or wrong, and this is not just a merely theoretical opinion that doesn't influence us, or at least it doesn't have to be just that, but rather it can actually determine the choices we make. And by this is one of the most important insights of Kant's philosophy, because by this he discovered a completely new ability, a new faculty in the human being, that is practical reason, or an actual, a pure will. A reason that is not just an instrument serving to reach other, ultimately not rational goals, but a reason that can set the goals. A reason that can decide what is right, what is wrong. And this is why Kant says reason is constitutive for our acting. I explained in several previous lectures that to Kant the thinking faculty has three parts: the intellect, the power of judgment, and reason. And to him the human mind, or you could say the psyche, also has three parts: the faculty of cognition, the feeling of pleasure and displeasure, and the desiring faculty. And in his three critiques he sort of examines these three faculties of our mind, and it turns out that for each of them one of our three thinking faculties is constitutive as opposed to just being regulative. Right? So regulative would mean it just supports that faculty, it just gives certain rules, just gives a certain structure to it. But constitutive means, well, it forms a basis, a fundament. So when it comes to our actions, reason is regulative in the hypothetical imperatives, in the imperatives of skill and prudence, and the technical, practical, the instrumental imperatives, however you want to call them. Here reason is just regulative. We have ultimately essential desire, but reason regulates the way we go about it. So we don't just blindly follow the instinct, but rather we actually follow a plan, a rational plan. But this means and ends rationality is only regulative. But in moral action, reason is constitutive. It constitutes the action. Doesn't just regulate how we go about it, but constitutes that we do this at all, that we want and desire this at all. Just like the other two faculties of our thinking are constitutive for the other two faculties of the mind, right? And the critique of pure reason, and I discussed this in several previous lectures, Kant shows that our intellect isn't just regulative for our understanding. It doesn't just provide concepts to understand the things we view in nature, but rather it is constitutive for nature, because through the 12 categories, so through the 12 basic concepts of our intellect, it in a way makes nature. It gives nature the basic laws which it has to follow. A concept like causality, to just take one of the 12 categories, causality is not something we find in nature and we learn about by observing nature, but rather we have this concept of causality, and only because we have it can we make experience, can we connect the individual perceptions we have of nature into forming one net, one chain of causality where one has caused the other. Likewise, when it comes to pleasure and displeasure, the power of judgment is not just regulative. It may be that when it comes to sense pleasure, to the pleasant, where I can judge, okay, this meal tastes good, this sexual practice feels hot or whatever, so I want more of that again, or where I can judge what would be the best way to get a certain pleasure. But no, when it comes to aesthetical pleasure, to the beautiful and the sublime, our power of judgment with its concept of purposiveness, of when it comes to the beautiful, finding a thing in its mere form purposive for our faculty of cognition, or when it comes to the sublime, finding something in its mere form maybe not purposive, but thereby finding that we ourselves are purposive, that we have this purpose to, in a way, subjugate all of nature to our reason and to use it for our purposes and to make it purposeful for us. That is what brings us pleasure here. That is why the power of judgment is constitutive here. Well, just like that, in this third instance, when it comes to the faculty of desiring, it turns out that reason, which when it comes to cognition is just regulative, just sort of directing the way in which we make cognitions, we make experience, just sort of giving us a direction. Here it turns out reason can be constitutive. It can give us a law according to which we ought to act. And with that, in one sweeping instance, Kant solved a major problem of all moral philosophy, and that is the problem of duty. Because actual morality has to be about duty. I already discussed that in the lecture on the foundation of morality. That is something that is often forgotten nowadays in our relativistic age. We like to base morality just on empathy or whatever, on compassion, on wanting to help others. But the issue is, what if someone doesn't want to help others? What if someone doesn't have empathy? Just so happens that he is less sensitive. Well, you have to be able to say you are a bad person, you are evil for not helping others, you ought to help them. If there is such a thing as morality, it cannot be conceived of unless it is conceived as a moral duty. Unless we are able to say this ought to be done, this is good, and this ought to not be done, this is evil, and if you do it, then you are evil, then you are guilty. But the issue usually is, where would that duty come from? Because the problem here is, as Kant would stress, duty cannot come from outside. Duty cannot be imposed on us. I mean, sure, we may talk like that in regular life. We may say someone has a duty because he has gotten certain orders. Like a soldier may have a duty because his general ordered him to do something. But that is not true duty in the moral sense. That is, if we are to call it a duty at all, it is just a relative, a conditioned duty. I mean, you don't have to be a soldier. You don't have to do this job. Someone else cannot truly obligate us, Kant says. In the end, all they can do is promise or threaten. Like, if I work somewhere, my boss cannot say, here you have to do this and that is your duty. He can only say, I want you to do it, I order you to do it, and well, I'm the boss here, I'm calling the shots. So if you don't do it, then I'm gonna fire you and you're not making money anymore. But that's all he can say, right? If you don't follow his instructions, he cannot really say, oh, you acted against your duty, you are an evil person. At most he can say, you are a dumb person because you just did something that now costs you your job. The same is true with the laws in the state, right? I mean, why would a state, or why would that state's government be able to obligate me? Why would it have a right to give me an obligation? I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's a monarchy and you say, oh, the king has a right to order you around because he's the king, because his father already was the king. That still doesn't give him a right as such to give me an obligation. Or whether you are in a democracy and you say, oh, this government was elected by a majority of the people. Well, okay, fine, maybe it was. But why would the majority have the right or the ability to give me an obligation? No, in the end, no matter what form of government you have, it comes down to mere power. They are more powerful than you. So, sure, they can set laws, but if you break a law, they cannot really say, you have done evil for breaking this law we imposed on you. You acted against your obligation. All they can say, once again, is you have acted in a dumb, in a non-prudent, in a foolish manner. Because now we are more powerful than you. You are powerless against us. We are going to punish you. And this is true even when it comes to God. Many people seem to be completely unable to understand this. And this goes both for believers and atheists. I mean, many atheists will say that there is no God and therefore there is no morality, thereby implying that only through a God could there be such a thing as moral obligation, moral duty. And many believers, of course not all, but especially the more fundamentalist ones, will believe the same. And no matter what belief they have, whether they are Christian or Mohammedan or Mosian or whatever, I have talked to such people who, no matter what I said, no matter what arguments I used, just wouldn't get it that their God cannot give me an obligation either. They would say, oh, but if you don't base morality on a God, then it's completely arbitrary. Only if you have God and he tells you this is good, this you ought to do, this is evil, this you ought not to do, only then do you have an objective standard of good and evil. Excuse me, this is still arbitrary. This is still relative. It's just your God's arbitrariness we are now following. This God you imagine is not God. He is just a heavenly tyrant. He is just, okay, a very, very powerful being apparently, against whom we are completely helpless. So maybe it would be prudent to do what he says. But his commandments are arbitrary. I mean, if that God, as fundamentalists would have me believe, tells me, for example, that I ought not to be gay. Being gay, or at least engaging in gay sex, is evil. Why is it evil? It makes no sense. And just because you say, and even if you were right, some God commanded it, some God said that it is evil, that doesn't make more sense. Just like a regular human tyrant, just in a more powerful version, this God would just give arbitrary rules. He cannot make being gay evil if I don't understand through my reason what should be evil about it. Good and evil only can be understood through my own insight, because I myself give myself a law and say, this I understand I should do, this I understand I shouldn't do. And when it's not like that, like with being gay, when I don't understand what should be bad about it as such, when it only comes down to, well, it is bad because God has forbidden it, then again, this is not a true obligation. This is just a threat. This is just someone more powerful than me telling me, don't be gay or I'm gonna punish you. I'm gonna throw you into hell. So again, it comes down to prudence. If this is true, then it would be prudent not to engage in gay acts. Sure. Because I don't want to end up in hell. I want to end up in heaven. But just like the government, just like a human tyrant cannot tell me when I break his laws that I have done evil, only that I've been dumb, the same would be true for this God. If I do something he forbids, like being gay or whatever, not praying enough, I don't know, all he could tell me at the final judgment is not you have done evil by not listening to me, but only that was not very prudent of you because you are now getting eternal punishment for it. No obligation can come from the outside, not even from God. And this is precisely one reason why nowadays we have this moral relativism. Because many people would say, yes, you're right, but that just means that there is no morality. They would say in nature there is no such thing as a moral law. In nature there is no such thing as duty. Which, to be sure, is correct. In nature there isn't. But Kant would say there is not just nature. There is reason. And this reason of ours, this practical reason, elevates us above nature. It puts us outside of the sensible realm and into an intelligible realm, into a realm of reason. It gives us the negative freedom to not have to follow our natural drives, and the positive freedom to instead follow our own concepts of good and evil, and thereby obligate ourselves. And if you don't agree with that, or if you don't even get that, if you insist on being a materialist, okay, fine. But again, if I detest one thing, it's intellectual dishonesty. And I find it very dishonest indeed that it is especially materialists and naturalists nowadays who like to call themselves rational, who act like they are the great arch rationalists. So, you are a rationalist. If you tell me that you only believe in nature, you only believe in crude matter, you only believe in something you can see and touch, or something I can hit you over the head with, and you don't believe in a moral law because it is something that, like a mathematical equation, you can only think but not see or touch, then you have no right to call yourself a rationalist. Because what you are saying is that you don't believe in reason. You don't only believe in that which is not rational, in mere nature. Well, Kant is a rationalist. Kant believes that reason is actually a thing. That something I think and can't see or touch has no less reality. Quite the opposite, it has more reality even. There's nothing which is as sure as our moral duty, Kant says. And that is precisely because it is not given to us from the outside, but so to say from the inside, from ourselves. We don't have an obligation because society tells us, or the government tells us, or even God tells us that we should do this, but because we ourselves, our own reason tells this to us. Because we cannot help if we just reflect about it. We cannot help but make the judgment that some things are good and ought to be done, and some things are evil and ought to not be done, and we would be despicable for doing them. And there's no place for moral relativism here. The relativists will of course say that different people, different cultures, different times have different concepts of morality, which I can agree with, but then I will just have to say that some of those concepts are wrong. If I have a mathematical equation, the fact that different people trying to solve it come to different results doesn't prove that the result is relative. It just goes to show that some of these people miscalculated, apparently. Like, I can agree that, let's say, the people who burned the witches probably didn't think that they were evil. They probably thought that they were doing the right thing. But if I say that burning people as witches is wrong, then this has to mean that it is wrong, period. It's not just wrong nowadays. It's not just wrong for me, but rather if I say it is wrong, then that statement necessarily implies that it would always be wrong, and that it was wrong back then too, and that those people were wrong to do it and should not have done it. If I don't say that, then I'm not really making a practical judgment, but just an aesthetical judgment. Then I'm not really saying that burning witches is morally wrong and ought not be done by anyone, but rather I'm just saying that burning people as witches goes against my taste, and therefore I would not do it because I find it distasteful. But someone else might have a different taste. Now, all theories to which freedom is just arbitrariness, is just following your whims, face the problem of the question, why should I act morally? Like, what is in it for me if I act morally? Why should I not just selfishly go after whatever serves my interests, even if it harms others? And if you have such a theory where freedom is just following your whims, you can only end up, if you have a theory of morality at all, with a theory of heteronomy, with one of the four other moral principles which I talked about in more detail in the lecture on the foundation of morality. you can only end up with a morality that promises or that threatens. So you can only end up trying to talk people into doing moral actions, but not for their own sake, not because they're moral, but for some other sake. So you can tell them maybe, if you act immoral, God will punish you and throw you into hell. Or you can tell them maybe, if you act immoral, you yourself will feel bad. You have compassion, you have empathy. You can only feel really good about yourself if you help other people. Or whatever. So all of these theories end up not really making people moral, because they cannot say that people have such a thing as a moral obligation, but rather all these theories basically accept the immorality of people and try to address that immorality, try to catch people by their own selfishness. And that's exactly why all of these theories come down to eudaemonism, to the principle of happiness, to saying, well, if you do moral actions, you will end up more happy than if you don't. Kant alone, with his heteronomy, with his transcendental philosophy, doesn't have that problem of that question, why should I act morally? Many seem to not understand that. I've found people saying, Kant's moral philosophy has less good reasons than any other for why I should act morally. I've even been in a lecture where a professor said that this is the weakness of Kant's moral philosophy, that he doesn't really tell us why we should act morally, what we get from acting morally. But if you want to get something out of it, you're already an immoral person. It's the wrong question. Kant says that even asking it proves that you are already evil. He says that this question is the true fall from grace, the true original sin, so to say, of the human being. You should act morally not because you get something from it, but just for its own sake, just because it is right. And the great thing about Kant's moral philosophy is that to him, the question doesn't need to be asked, why should I act morally? Because we already want to act morally. We, that is, we taken as rational beings, as truly we. If I was nothing but a rational being, like if I was some sort of pure angel, I would only want to act morally, because I would not have any sensual drives, I would not have any desires that might be immoral. All I would have is my own practical reason, my own pure will, giving itself, through its autonomy, the moral law. So for Kant, the question is not, why should I act morally, but rather, why should I act immorally? Not, why should I do good, but why should I do evil? And the answer, of course, is because I'm not some sort of pure angel. I also have my animal parts. I'm also a sensual being with sensual desires. So it is only that in me which is not truly me. It is that nature in me which makes me do evil. But if I was truly myself, I would always do good. This is great. This means that Kant is one of the few thinkers who is not part of that at least 2,000-year-old, very much Christian influenced tradition, which believes that we want to do evil. we are evil at the core, we are sinful, we committed original sin and now it sticks to us, and the evil is that which we want to do, right? The devil is the one who promises us power and sex, lust, enjoyment, all the earthly pleasures. The devil is the seducer, while to be good means to deny yourself pleasures, to be an ascetic, to be the monk in the monastery, to be the hermit in the desert, to live in celibacy, to fast, to punish and whip yourself, right? This is the old Christian image. This is a very Manichaean idea of good and evil, where to be good you need to heroically abstain from that which you actually want and do something which actually you don't want. And apart from being wrong, this concept of good and evil is also very dangerous. This is what Hannah Arendt found in her discussion of the banality of evil, of someone like Eichmann, because it can lead to you actually telling yourself when you are doing evil that precisely because you don't actually want to do it, because you feel bad doing it, it must be the right thing, right? That's what Eichmann did. He didn't feel good about killing all the Jews. He had some bad feelings about that, but that actually gave him some twisted sort of peace of mind, because he thought, okay, since I feel bad about it, I'm clearly not being selfish, I'm clearly not killing the Jews for egoistical reasons, but since I feel bad about it, that proves that I'm doing it because it is my duty. So it proves that I'm actually a good person, because I'm doing something which I feel bad about. Kant calls such a concept of morality a morose ethics, and he rejects it. What he says is that the evil isn't that which we truly want and we have to force ourselves to be good, but rather the good is that which we truly want, and we have to force ourselves, or we have to be forced by our sensuality, by our drives, to do evil. He says that the evil is always done with some sort of inner rejection to it, even if it's unconscious. Take as an example, imagine you live in the times of the Nazis, and there's some Jew, some fleeing Jew coming to you and asking you to hide him. Now, if I ask people, what would they do in that situation? Many people would probably answer, oh, I wouldn't have hidden that Jew. I would have been too scared that the Nazis find out and would kill me too. I would have not had the courage to help the Jews. I think many people would answer that. But if I asked them, would it have been good to hide the Jews? Like if you abstract from yourself and whether you would have had the courage or have been afraid, would it have been good? Should more people have done that? Is the person who did do that, even if it wasn't you, is that a good person? And everyone should aspire to be like him? Then they would probably answer yes, unless they are complete scum. But by answering yes, what they are saying is that my reason tells me this is good. Hiding the Jew is a good thing. Hiding the Jew is what should happen. And if their reason says that, it is what they want. I mean, it would not make sense to say, I understand through my rational thinking that this is good, and still I believe it should not be done. No, saying this is good and saying I should do this is really the same thing. So they as rational beings, they want to do this. They want to help the Jew. The only thing that makes them act against their own insight into good and evil, the only thing that makes them act against what they themselves understand should happen, is their sensuality, right? Their self-preservation, their fear of being found out and killed. So it is that in them which is not them, which is their nature, which is what they have in common with any common non-thinking animals. That is why Kant says obligation, moral duty, is only a thing for a being such as we, which is a rational being, but a rational being with sensuality. A pure intellectual being. And it's often a bit unclear in Kant's writing if there are several or just one. Some people have interpreted it as meaning some sort of angels, but if you read more closely certain passages and if you think about it more, it should be clear that there can only be one pure rational being, that is God. But no matter whether one or many, a pure rational being would not have a moral obligation. Which doesn't mean that it could just act arbitrarily and could do whatever it wants and not be morally judged, but rather it means that what it wants would always be the good thing. For such a being, there is no shall, because there's already a want. You cannot say to God, you ought to do the good. God could just reply, well, yes, I already want to do the good. I don't have to think of it as a duty because I have no inclinations to ever do something else. What Kant is saying is that morality only turns into an obligation, into a duty for us. He says that which we necessarily want as a part of the intelligible world becomes something we should want, we should do as a part of the sensual world. So that which a being which only has reason, only has the law it gives to itself, would necessarily want, because it just would not have any reasons to want anything else. For us, who do have reasons to want something else, who do have sensual drives, becomes something we don't want necessarily, but rather we tell ourselves, if we reflect about it, we should want, we should do. Nowadays, morality has turned into a dirty word that people often don't use anymore. Even those who do have some sort of moral cause often don't talk about morality, or let alone about moral obligation. They may talk about empathy or something like that. And that is because morality to people has this connotation of coming with force, of taking away their freedom. Maybe that's even more so here in Germany than in the English. In Germany we have quite a few words that are basically insults that just mean being a moral person. Like we have this word Moralapostel, so a disciple of morality, and that's a dirty word. If you call someone that, you are saying, oh, you put yourself above others and you tell others what to do, how dare you. Or we have this word Gutmensch, which literally just means a good human, but it has sort of the same meaning as in English social justice warrior has. So the Gutmenschen, they are these woke people that tell us what to do, how to talk, to be political correct, how dare they. And of course a word like social justice warrior is also, is justice a bad thing? I mean, we can talk about whether these so-called social justice warriors, whether they really are fighting for justice or whether they are misguided. But the name being used as an insult seems to imply that justice as such is bad. And again, this is very much part of the liberal zeitgeist, and this is something that liberals of all political parties and inclinations have in common. They again may differ in which liberties are important to them, and they may differ in who they blame with taking their liberties away. But they will say, oh, the old white man and the patriarchy, or oh, the communists, the leftists, the woke mob, they are telling me what to do. They are telling me not to have an abortion, or not to have sex with whomever I want, or they are telling me not to ruin the climate, or not to use insensitive language or whatever. And while I disagree with this liberalism, I want to take it seriously, and I want to apply Kant's sympathetic method, which I discussed in a previous lecture, and which is about not completely throwing positions away as fully wrong, but rather assuming that even in a wrong opinion, there's still some partial truth, and looking for that partial truth and retaining it, keeping it even as you disregard the rest, to combine it with your position into a better third position. So what is that partial truth in this liberal rejection of morality? Well, I think these people, they on some level realize that all human beings are equal. And since all human beings are equal, it is no one's place to put himself above others and to tell others what to do. With his own limited individual self, he is not better than they with their limited individual selves. And it would indeed be arrogant and presumptuous and an attack on their freedom to tell them what to do. And this seems to be what these liberals fear is happening whenever someone talks about their moral obligations. If I tell them, let's say the right-wing liberals, if I tell them, well, by driving your cars mindlessly, you are ruining the climate and our possibility to live on this earth, then all they are hearing is, oh, I want to be a tyrant. I arbitrarily want to restrict your freedom to drive around in a car. And if someone else tells the leftist liberal, tells the feminist, oh, by having an abortion, you are murdering the child, this actually is already a human being and you are murdering it, then all she is hearing is, I want to be a tyrant, I want to take away your freedom over your own body, I want to impose myself on you. And I think in most cases, the liberals of both sides, the left-wingers and the right-wingers, are actually right. In most cases, the other side may hide behind morality, but really this is just, Nietzsche would say, will to power. This is just them wanting to impose their limitedness, their individuality on other human beings, even though those others are equal to them, even though it is not their place to put themselves above those others. In most cases, I say, not in all cases. There are also cases on both sides where people are just too sensitive and seeing enemies where there are none and being hysterical. But there certainly is this desire to impose yourself on others. So that is the partial truth in this liberal rejection of morality. But I would say that while yes, it is despotic when another self tells me myself what I ought to do, and when I have to follow the whims of another self, it is no less despotic when instead I follow the whims of my own self. Just because it happens to be my own and not another self doesn't mean that it's not whims, that it's not arbitrary. I would posit that there's a third option, and that is not following whims, not following a limited individual, whether it's another or myself, but following reason, asking reason what is right, what should be done, what ought to be done. And in that sense, this arrogant pseudo-morality, just imposing yourself on others, has to be distinguished from talking actual morality to others. Yes, sure, morality might have gotten a bad name because in the past, and also this is of course still happening in the present, there might have been restrictions of freedom in the name of morality. People might have told others, no, you can't be gay, or you can't have sex before marriage, that is immoral because I say so. Not because reason says so, not because we can actually all rationally think about it and have the same insight and agree that this is immoral, but just I impose my claim that this is immoral on you and force you to act according to my understanding of morality. This is of course wrong. But we should not have this allergic reaction to any sort of talk about morality. We should not react like this when someone just tells us, hey, what you are doing there, I think it is wrong. We should be willing to discuss that. Maybe that other person is right. Because while of course we can't force others to follow our understanding of morality, we can very much talk to them and try to make them see that our understanding is correct. In the end, they should still follow their own insight, their own reason. But we can, of course, without being arrogant, without imposing ourselves, try to help others find that insight, right? Just like a teacher of mathematics should not just tell students, oh, you have to write down this solution to the equation. This is the correct one. And they should not just have to follow him on his authority. No, they should calculate for themselves. But he can guide them. He can teach them how to calculate. He can help them use their own reason so that they eventually reach the same insight that he already has. So when I tell another person what to do, when I do it as this person, as Jonathan Löwer, that is arrogant, that is presumptuous, because the other person is a self just like me and we are equal. But if I put myself aside, if I don't speak as this individual self that I happen to be, but rather I speak as the voice of reason, I let reason as such speak through me, not to impose myself on the other, but to try to, let's say, activate his own reason so that he can hear the same voice agreeing with me in his insight. That's not imposing, that's not arrogant. That's what should happen. And as a side note, this is why I, as an Aufklärer, very much reject the morality of the current left, of the political correct people, of the woke people, or whatever you want to call them, because they work with the dictatorship of sensitivity. Because that's what their morality is about, right? They make demands that you act in a certain way, that you talk in a certain way. They tell you, oh, you must use the pronouns that a person has chosen, even if those are not even real pronouns, even if the person just made up new words, you have to respect that and use that person's pronouns. Or they tell you you must not use certain words because they are racial slurs. You must not say Indians, you must say Native Americans, or you must not say nigger, you must say black person. And if you use those words, even just as a quote, like I just did, even that was super racist and insensitive. I should have said the N-word. I know that especially in America, people are super sensitive about that, but excuse me, we are adults. Like, we don't have to behave like in a kindergarten where you censor bad words, where you say F word instead of fuck. We all know that F word stands for fuck. Like, we hear it in our head anyways. And if you are so sensitive that you can't hear a word, not even as a quote, then there's something wrong with you, not with the person saying that word. We should focus once again on a person's inner posture, on whether that person is actually racist or not, if that person actually has regard for people of a different skin color or whatever or not, and not on something stupid like a word. We should not be afraid of words. This is not Harry Potter where you can't say Voldemort's name. But my point is that they make these demands, they make this allegedly moral rules. But if you ask, okay, why? Why should I speak like that? Why should I act like that? Why are these words evil? Explain it to me. Even if it is an honest, innocent question, not a loaded question, not you saying, oh, you guys are completely wrong, but if you are neutral and honestly want to understand it, you're not allowed to ask that question. As a white, straight man, you just have to obey. You don't have to ask questions. All you will get as an answer to that question is, you don't know what it feels like to be black and hear the N-word. You don't know what it feels like to be trans and be misgendered or whatever. Which of course Kant would have agreed with that, because to him a feeling is something subjective. So yeah, I don't know how another person feels like. As a white person, I don't know what a black person feels like. I mean, to be sure, black persons, they are also not a hive mind. I mean, one black person also doesn't know what another black person feels. But that aside, okay, I don't know what you feel. But if that's the case, that exactly means I have no moral obligation here. Because my obligation rests on my rational insight. It rests on my reason, understanding this is good, this ought to be done, this is evil, this ought not to be done. Now you are telling me that I cannot understand this. That it is based on a feeling which I cannot possibly have. Well, then I'm not evil for speaking the way you don't want me to speak. I'm only guilty if I do an action despite understanding that it is wrong. If I cannot possibly understand that it is wrong, I cannot be judged for doing it. What these people are telling me is that I ought not to understand, that I have no right to demand understanding, that I have no right to my own autonomy, to follow my own moral law, but rather I should submit to heteronomy. I should submit to what others tell me. I should not be aufgeklärt, I should not think for myself. I should let others think for me, or rather feel for me. And that I will always reject. And I would claim that it is only people who, at least unconsciously, sense that they could not rationally prove their point and their moral demands because they are not rational. It is only such people who violently reject to the mere question why they demand this, why this should be right. It doesn't matter whether it's these political correct leftists who tell you no, as a white person you cannot question this, even questioning it is racist, you just have to submit. Or whether it's fundamentalists who tell you no, you cannot question what is supposed to be bad about being gay, you just have to submit to God's demands. If they had a rational explanation and proof, they would give it. They would not react so violently against being asked for one. So this leads me to the suspicion that Nietzsche is quite right when he says that this sort of slave morality, which is what these leftists, what they follow, that this sort of slave morality is not about morality at all. It is not about being good, but rather it is a very insidious method of those who have been slaves, who have been subjugated, to get on top. It is their will to power. It is them trying to, by giving others a bad conscience, impose themselves on them. But I don't want to make this a Nietzsche lecture. That is for some other time. This is a Kant lecture, and I think that especially in our day and age, especially in the face of the ecological crisis and the climate emergency, Kant's concept of freedom as being basically identical with morality, Kant's concept of morality as not being something we are forced into even though we don't want it, something that is imposed on us by some outside tyrannical force, so we have to be liberal and rebel against that imposing force, but rather morality being our true will. To actually do go back to Nietzsche once more quickly, the motto of Nietzsche's philosophy is become who you are. Nietzsche would say most people, they don't really have an I yet. They don't have a true self. They have never asked, who am I? Who do I want to be? Who do I want to become? Well, I think especially nowadays, Kant's philosophy of freedom and of morality is very important. People think that the actions that destroy the climate, like flying on vacation or eating their meat or being mindless consumers or whatever, that this is what they want, and they react quite hysterically when they feel that their freedom is to be restricted, that there are people trying to impose themselves onto them. Like here in Germany, they talk about eco-dictator, like the ecological dictatorship that the Greens want to impose on them. And I think this has a lot to do with the way people are being raised in our society. Because let's face it, children, with very, very few exceptions, like I was a lucky exception with my great dad, but regular children, even in the most modern liberal households, grow up basically under a despotic regime. They're constantly told what to do, what not to do, and those rules are arbitrary. They are not rational rules. Like, it's not that kids are just told don't run onto the street where you get run over by cars, but no, kids are told no, you already had a piece of chocolate today, you don't get any more sweets, or No, you just get half an hour of PlayStation per day. After that, you have to go outside and play outside or whatever. Or as I mentioned in another recent lecture, a mother I saw at the store fighting with her little daughter who had picked up a stone from the street, and it's just a stone. Let the girl have the stone if she wants the stone. Why is it your business? It's her decision if she wants the stone. But no, the mother said, I don't want that stone at home. You are not taking that stone with you. And here I can promise you that I'm actually being much more liberal than all the liberals, because I completely reject this way of raising children. I think it is arrogant and it is a disregard for humanity. Parents, just because they are older and more powerful and maybe smarter than children, they should not abuse that advantage they have to be tyrants and despots at home. They have no right. All human beings are equal. That includes children, because our equality doesn't hinge on our age or on how smart we are or whatever. Our equality comes from our inner humanity. And no human has the right to impose himself on other human beings. Again, with his limited self. It would be different if he shed that self and rose to just being a voice and avatar of reason, not imposing arbitrary rules, but just setting the laws that reason itself sets. Again, if you tell your child, don't run on the street, don't get run over by cars, that's different. But these arbitrary, dictatorial rules, that's the issue. And that, of course, raises people to resent being told what to do, because they associate it only with tyranny, with despotism, with arbitrary rules. And they are glad once they turn 18 and become free in the liberal sense. So once they are freed from the despotism of their parents and only have their own despotism, the despotism of their own drives left, and now they associate the state, the government, with the big daddy. They are, so to say, traumatized from their childhood, and when they feel the state wants to take some freedom away, that sort of reactivates that childhood trauma, so to say. This is why it's important to make people understand that saving, for example, the environment is not about taking away their freedom, rather it should be about them gaining freedom. Because they aren't free by eating meat or by flying. They would be free if they started being rational beings. If they started not mindlessly and uncritically following their drives. Or let's face it, not even their natural drives, just their habits, just their society's norms, just what they have been raised with and got used to. But if they started questioning each of their actions, if they started asking, is this good? Should this happen or not? If they started following their own insight. But of course, I also want to be clear that here we reach a problem that all Aufklärung faces, and that is that people don't actually want to be free. Especially if they talk about it all the time, like the liberals do. It's not enough to just tell people, no, this is not taking away your freedom, this will make you more free, because actually they don't want this, actually they fear freedom. What they want usually is just fulfilling their desires, but they don't want to be free of them. They even say so openly. I mean, I have heard many people say, oh no, I could never let go of meat. Or, oh no, I have to fly on vacation once or twice a year, or else I would go crazy. Now, to be clear, we could have an open discussion whether you have to be a vegetarian or whether you have to stop flying. But that's not the point here. They are not saying, I thought about eating meat, I thought about vegetarianism, and I came to the conclusion that eating meat is okay, that it is a good thing. What they are often saying is, I could not let go of meat. Likewise, they are not saying, I came to the conclusion that flying is okay and good. They are saying, I have to fly on vacation or else I would go crazy without my vacation. And I'm sorry, but this is pathetic. And this just proves, if you talk like that you have no self-regard. That you have no dignity as a human being. I mean, if that was the case, if I could not let go of, let's say, meat or something else, even if that was the case, I would be embarrassed to admit it. Because what you're saying here is that you're an addict. What you're saying here is that you are an animal, that you are a slave of your drives. I would not be particularly proud of that. I would be ashamed to admit such a thing. We should want to be free. We should want to be independent of our drives. Even the ones we do indulge in. Because we say, they are good, it's okay to have them. We don't have to let go of them. Still, we should want to be able to let go of them, if we wanted to. Kant says as much. Kant says, I should, if I have dignity, if I have self-reverence, I should want to be able to let go of anything. Be it my favorite hobby, or my favorite food, or my favorite person, like my beloved wife or my best friend. Doesn't matter. I should want to be able to live without them. Now, get me right here. I'm not saying I should want to live without them. I should want to be able to live without them. I mean, of course, if I have a beloved wife, I want to spend my life with that woman. I don't want to live without her. That's fine. But maybe tomorrow she gets run over by a car. Or she gets cancer and dies from cancer, whatever. Of course, I don't want that to happen. Of course, that would be terrible. But it could happen. And if it happens, I don't want to be so dependent on her that it completely ruins my life forever. I want to not become depressed because of that. I don't want to eventually commit suicide because I can't live without her. I want to be able to move on. Likewise, a less extreme example. Maybe I have some favorite food. I don't want to stop eating it. But maybe for some time they won't have it at the store. Maybe there will be some harvest problems, maybe some bug infested all the fields of this vegetable, and now this year I can't eat it. I won't be happy about that, but I want to not be so dependent on this one food, no matter what it is, that I can't still enjoy my life and still enjoy my meals without it. That's what Kant is saying. Not that we have to want letting go of everything, but we should want, it's a matter of our own human dignity and freedom, we should want to be able to let go of everything. I mean, it's one thing if you are a little child and you are dependent on your favorite plushie and you can't fall asleep without that plushie. In a child, that's okay, that can be excused. But I'm sorry, at some point you have to grow up and be an adult. And I'm not saying that as an adult you have to become completely heartless. I'm not saying that you have to throw away your former favorite plushie. You can still keep it and have some sentimental attachment to it. And you can still be somewhat sad if somehow it gets lost. But if you are an adult, you should be able to sleep without it, and you should be able to move on even if it gets lost. You shouldn't, like the child, cry and be unable to fall asleep because you lost your plushie. That's just unworthy and undignified of a human being. And once again, for Kant, there is not such a big abyss between happiness and morality. They don't contradict each other usually. Quite the opposite. Usually they go hand in hand. Because what I'm saying here about freedom doesn't even go just for morality. It also goes for pragmatism, right? Even for pragmatic reasons, even for reasons of my own happiness, I should want to be able to be independent, to not be enslaved to my drives. I mean, again, let's go with the smoker. I should want to be able to stop smoking. Not even because I understand that it's morally wrong, but in this case just because I understand that it's pragmatically wrong, that it's bad for my health. Why would I want to depend on anything? Why would I want chains, even if they are golden chains? So, with that, I hope to have shown and explained how to Kant rationality, freedom, morality are really one and the same thing and go hand in hand. Before I close off this long lecture, I want to address one more point, and that is that with that, Kant has also laid the foundation for moral universalism. Because other moral principles have these issues that you can't really prove that their morality that they posit is an obligation for everyone. I mean, I already addressed that they can't really prove a moral obligation at all. All they can show at best is that it would be prudent, that it would bring you happiness or prevent unhappiness to follow that principle. But that aside, let's pretend even that they could show that you have a moral duty to act in a certain manner. What they couldn't show is that every rational being has that same duty. Again, you can go back to my lecture on the foundation of morality and to the four moral principles, the four possible principles that Kant discusses, and you can go with any of them. It's always the same issue. Let's say you are going with inner empiricism. So you are basing morality on a feeling that you have inside. Let's say you base it on compassion. Then this morality only holds true for those who have that feeling. Let's say it's for all human beings, okay. But what happens when you have a rational being which doesn't feel? Like, let's say we create a true AI. Let's say some computer, some robot develops consciousness, and now he starts going on a quest to eradicate humankind. If you try to argue with that robot and to convince this AI that what it's doing is evil, and all you can tell it is, well, compassion obliges us to not kill human beings, then maybe on a theoretical, intellectual level, the AI could understand you. The AI could say, okay, I understand that you human beings have feelings, and amongst them you have this feeling of compassion, and that makes you want to not harm others, but I don't have feelings, so I'm not bound by compassion. Likewise, it doesn't have to be an AI, could also be some spiritual being, some sort of angel who only has his reason but no feelings. Those would not be bound by a morality of compassion. Or let's say you are an outer rationalist. You try to base your morality on God, on God's commandments. Well, who is to say that God always gives the same commandments to everyone? Maybe he would give different commandments to different people. You could not say then that, for example, murder is wrong. Because maybe God allows certain murders. Maybe he says, kill all the infidels. or like it is in the Old Testaments, when the Hebrews invade the Holy Land under Joshua, and basically get a commandment by God to commit genocide, to kill the former inhabitants of the land and conquer that land for themselves. Even an individual person could get a different commandment, like Abraham being told by God to kill and sacrifice his son Isaac. Well, this is a problem that Kant's moral theory doesn't have. Because to him, morality is not imposed from the outside, and therefore it can't be imposed to different beings or different kinds of beings in different manners, but rather morality comes out of our own reason. We, being autonomous beings, give ourselves the moral law. This is something that any being which has reason must be able to do. And therefore, this morality is universal. Of course, universal only for rational beings, not for irrational beings, like it doesn't apply to animals. When a wild animal attacks me and bites me or even tries to kill me and eat me, we wouldn't say that this animal is being evil and that it is guilty for its actions. We would say that this animal is causing problems, that this animal is dangerous. We would try to protect ourselves from that animal. Maybe we would even kill that animal to be safe from it. But we would understand that this is just nature, that this is just this animal following some instincts, and that it can't act in another way, and that it can't understand that what it is doing is wrong. And again, if you can't understand that what you are doing is wrong, then it is not wrong. Then you are not responsible for it. You are only responsible if you could potentially understand that it is wrong. Not if you actually understand it. Of course, many evil people don't understand that they are evil because they don't think about it. But if you have the potentiality, if you thought about it, to understand, then you have an obligation. Then you are responsible. And this goes for all rational beings equally. So Kant's morality is not even restricted just to human beings. Of course, in practice it is, because we don't know any other rational beings. But if we knew of others, like if aliens landed here, Kant's moral principle would also apply to them. Same goes for higher beings, for angels, or even for God himself. They are bound by the same moral law as we are. It makes no sense to say that for them different standards apply. What would be an evil action for us is okay if an angel or if God does it. No, it either is good according to what reason says, or it is evil according to what reason says. As an aside, there does exist this popular trope in certain works of science fiction or fantasy to present beings which allegedly have some sort of intellect, some sort of reason, but a different one than we have. Some sort of higher alien races, or demons, or monsters, or dark eldritch gods. And the story tells us that they have an intellect or a consciousness that is beyond human comprehension, and that they may have some sort of morality, but a different sort of morality. So they may commit actions that seem to be evil or cruel by our standards, but by their own understanding they are not doing evil, they just work according to a different sort of morality or whatever. And nowadays we even have some clowns that cannot tell science fiction from reality, and that believe that this will become real. We have these transhumanists who believe that soon there will be a super AI that has actual consciousness, and there will be singularity and the omega point reached, and however else they may call this stuff. And some of them say that this supercomputer we are going to build will have a consciousness and a way of thinking and moral standards that are beyond human comprehension. And I'm sorry, this is a nice phrase. If you're writing a story, it sounds good. And I mean, when you're writing a story, you can really just pretend. You can just make empty claims. I mean, I can also write a story and say, oh, in my fantasy world, there are four-angled triangles. Like, no one stops me from writing that, but it doesn't become something that makes sense just because I can write it down. And likewise, I must admit that this phrase, oh, these beings have a consciousness, a way of thinking beyond human comprehension, that this very claim alone already is beyond my human comprehension. Like, I just don't understand what it's supposed to mean. I find it incredibly stupid. If you don't fall for this, if you don't just mindlessly take it at face value, if you actually question these stories, if you actually look at them, I would say that these monsters or dark gods or whatever they present us with, it always comes down to one of two types. Either they don't show any reason at all. They are just sort of forces of nature, like an earthquake or like a tornado or whatever. In that case, they don't have another sort of reason that goes beyond human comprehension. They are just animals. Maybe they are big animals, maybe animals big enough to swallow whole planets. Maybe they are very powerful animals with magic powers. But in the way they function, mindlessly following their nature, not thinking about what they are doing and about whether it's right or wrong, they are animals. I'm sorry. They are not some fancy, interesting, eldritch creature. They are just animals. And then there are stories where such creatures do seem to have a certain sort of reason, where they do show rationality, where they can maybe even be talked to. Usually they will then use their rationality to manipulate human beings, or to torture their minds, or to trick them or whatever, or to taunt them even. But they can be talked to, and they can be reasoned with to some degree. But well, if that's the case, then I'm sorry, they don't have another sort of rationality that is beyond human comprehension. They clearly have plain old rationality, and if they don't use it to ask which actions would be morally good, which actions would be their duty, and which they shouldn't do, then they are responsible for that, then they are guilty, then they are evil, then they can be judged according to our moral standards. If they have a reason like ours that allows them to talk to us on some level, to understand us on some level, then it would also potentially allow them to understand that what they are doing is evil. And that is why, even before I got deeper into Kant, I always had some sort of, let's say, instinctive reservations about such stories and the claims they make about these monsters or whatever they present. It seems to me that they mostly attract rationalists. I mean, think of something like the Cthulhu mythos. I think it's no coincidence that Lovecraft, who invented it, was a life-rejecting nihilist. It seems to me that maybe people like this concept of beings that go beyond human comprehension because they actually like the thought that there is no such thing as reason, because they are irrationalists and they want to be told that their reason is just something relative, that it doesn't apply to everything. As a more aufklärt person, I think if you are into stories with, I don't know, demons or dark gods, especially evil, especially mighty creatures, I'm not saying those can't appear in a story, but I think as a more aufklärt person, you would maybe be more attracted to demons such as they are presented in Berserk. Or in my own fantasy novel I'm working on, The Bard's Song. I've written the first volume, but it's not published yet. It doesn't have a publisher yet. I'm planning to hopefully find one someday and to eventually write more volumes. You will be attracted to such a story where there may be demons. They may be very evil and may seem very inhumane, but if you look more closely, those stories actually show that the demons still are very much human at their core and are very much responsible and guilty for their actions. Kant would stress that reason is always one and the same. I mean, if it was two completely different things, why would we subsume them under the same concept? Why would we give them the same name? In that case, one would be reason and the other would be something else, but not reason. Reason is one and the same and has to be the same, therefore, for every rational being. This goes for theoretical reason. I mean, consider mathematics. A triangle, the angles of a triangle together make up 180 degrees. And 5 plus 7 makes 12. This is not just true for us. This has to be true for every being which has rationality at all and which can understand mathematics at all. It makes no sense to say, oh, there are other beings with a reason beyond our comprehension for whom 5 plus 7 would be 20. No, either they have reason, then they understand that it's 12, or they have no reason and they can't understand mathematics at all, like some worm or fly or whatever. And the same goes for the will, which is just practical reason. It can only give itself one and the same law in all rational beings, and that is one and the same moral law, by which we all are bound. And again, only insofar as we are not just rational beings, only insofar as we can also be irrational, as we also have sensual drives, can we ever be made to not follow that law. If we were only rational, we would necessarily follow it. Because as Kant likes to say, no power can ever contradict itself. Like if you consider a stone, as long as there's just the power of gravitation, the stone will lie on the ground and it won't move up into the air. And likewise, if you throw the stone, and as long as there was just your throw, if there was no such thing as gravitation, then the stone would fly on and on and on in the direction you have thrown it. Only because there are these two opposing powers, the gravitation pulling the stone down, your throw, throwing it up in the air, only because of that will the stone fly for a time, will fly in a sort of bow, and come down to the ground again. Because the powers are sort of working against each other. And the same is true for practical reason, for the will. If there was only the will, we would be good. Not because someone forces us to be good against our will, but quite the opposite, because we could not act against our own will. We could only act in one manner because we only have that one will. Only because we have the will, but also sensuality, is it possible that we can act against our own will, that we can act against the moral law. This, by the way, is also the reason why, to Kant, it is clear that God, being a pure rational being, must be good. And God cannot possibly be evil or do evil. God cannot possibly change his opinion either. God cannot be moved by anything. God cannot act on whims. He doesn't have whims. He doesn't have sensual drives that could suddenly make him change his plans or whatever. He only has his own will, which is in complete unity with itself. God has no sensuality, no receptiveness. He is not affected by anything. He only rules himself through his own law, through his own autonomy. And that is why he has to follow the moral law. And if you think that this somehow means that, according to Kant, God is not free, because he has to be good, he cannot be evil, then you would still not have understood what freedom actually means. Kant would say this is a primitive, an absurd idea of freedom that you have there. It would mean that freedom means the ability to be unfree. That freedom means the ability to do something stupid. No, to Kant, freedom does not mean I can choose between good and evil. Because, as I explained already in the lecture on the faculty of desiring, every choice has to be determined by something. There has to be a driving spring making me choose A rather than B. If I can choose between good and evil, why would I ever choose evil? If my reason tells me this is good, this ought to happen, why would I choose evil? Only because maybe there's something else besides my reason, only because there's my sensuality, my instincts which drive me. God doesn't have that. So he can only do good. And that doesn't mean that he is less free than we. It means that he's more free. Because again, to Kant, freedom in the negative sense means being free from the sensual drives. Well, that is the case for God because he doesn't have sensuality. And freedom in the positive sense means being autonomous. Following not another law that nature imposes on you, but following your own law. That too is the case in the case of God. And precisely because no other law can be imposed on him, because there's no possibility of him ever following anything but his own law, that is why there's no possibility of him doing evil. So yes, God cannot choose between good and evil. God has to be good. But that doesn't mean he's not free. That means he is free. Because he has to be good, not because some outer force forces him to be. Like, if you think this is being unfree, you still haven't gotten that freedom and morality is one. Rather, he has to be good because he wants to be good. And there's nothing that could ever make him do something else besides that which he wants. To bring this to an end, I once again want to stress that if freedom meant acting without any reason at all, it would be worthless. It would just be blind contingency, blind arbitrariness. It would just be a metaphysical coin toss. As I said before, Kant says everything always have to follow a law. There is no such thing as lawlessness. So if we don't want to follow the law of nature, which doesn't come from us, that can only mean following our own law, which we gave ourselves, the moral law. So Kant says our actions, in a way, are always forced. Being free does not mean not being forced to act in a certain manner, but it means forcing yourself. We are less free, Kant says, the more physical force there is. So the more some physical drive forces me. Right? So the drug addict, as I said before, he's very unfree because his addiction forces him. And we are more free the more moral force there is. So the more we force ourselves to act in a certain manner because we understood that it is the right thing to do. And the common person who has not studied philosophy may of course be forgiven for having a naive concept of freedom. But what I don't forgive is that even many so-called philosophers, that many teachers and professors, many people who ought to know better, still have this naive concept of freedom. There is this phenomenon, which I admit I never quite got, but it's still a thing, of people knowing one thing in the abstract, being able to talk about it, but then as soon as they enter life, as soon as they, so to say, step down from giving a lecture, it's as if they have completely forgotten everything they know and just become normal people like everyone else. Let me tell an anecdote from my dad's days of studying. There was, at his university, there was some guy who already had a PhD in philosophology, and who was not the worst or the least knowledgeable there. Quite the opposite. He was an expert on Hegel, but of course also knew about Kant. And at some point, my dad was in some bar or something with that guy and with others, and a discussion about freedom arose, and some girl, some student denied that we have free will. And this guy, this doctor of philosophy, insisted that there is free will, and to prove it, he wanted to crush his glass of wine in his hand and thereby hurt himself. And he was really about to do it, my dad told me. They really had to all talk to him, and the girl had to say, no, okay, I get your point, I agree with you, to make him stop. He really was about to do it. And for that, they should have taken his PhD from him. And I'm not just saying that, I'm serious about that, because as an aufklärt person, I take such things as the word doctor seriously. As Fichte pointed out, doctor is not just an empty title that you get because you have written some thesis at your university. The word doctor actually has a meaning. Words have meanings. Just like I refuse to call every Mohammedan a Muslim, because a Muslim is someone who actually honestly submits to God, and most of them don't do that. Most of them are atheists, even if they don't know that they are. I refuse to call most alleged doctors doctors, because docere means to teach in Latin. Doctus is he who has been taught, the scholar. And doctor is the taught one, the scholar, who teaches others, who passes on his scholarly knowledge. So the word should mean something. And people like this guy who wanted to crash the wine glass in his hand, they should not be doctors. I refuse to consider them as such. Because this has nothing to do with freedom. And Kant talks about this very thing. The example he gives is not crushing a glass of wine in your hand, but he says in his lectures, what would we think of somebody who, to prove that he is free, would dress in his best, finest, most expensive clothing and then throw himself into the mud? That would mean understanding freedom as the ability to do something stupid. That is not freedom. Quite the opposite. Freedom to Kant means, once again, following your rational insight, following your own concepts of good and bad, good and evil. So freedom is our ability to do that which we have understood to be good. And by acting against what we understand to be good, by doing something like crushing a glass in our hand or throwing ourselves into the mud with our good clothes on, something which we understand is bad, we don't prove that we are free. We just prove that we are quite absurd and unaufklärt. No, once again, freedom is one with rationality, and rationality is one with morality. You are free if you do that which you understand to be good, and that which you understand to be good, if you give yourself a law according to which you should act, is your moral duty. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.